Hey everybody, welcome back to City Skylines 2, and welcome back to St. Luke. First of all, I want to thank everyone for the amazing responses that I got on my last video. I really wasn't expecting the video to do that well, first of all, but also the comments were very kind, so thank you all. And in general, I'm extremely happy about how everything's been going, not just for my video, but also with this whole thing that Paradox is doing, where a bunch of creators get the game a bit earlier and we have waves in which we can release videos. I saw there were some questions about this on the first video, but basically a whole group of people have gotten an early access copy of the game, and around certain days we're allowed to make videos up to certain milestones, and also the video is only allowed to be half an hour long at most. So that's why everything is releasing very much in a coordinated way, but I think it's something that's a lot of fun for us creators to do as well, and giving you guys a good view into what's possible in the game without releasing the current build to the public. Because while it doesn't really have me concerned, you can definitely tell that this is a build that still needs a little bit of work before it's finished for the final release date, and in some ways, they even already started incorporating some feedback like the contour lines, which have been added since the last video. And you can actually notice that at the start of this video, the stuff that I'm recording right now, I don't have the contour lines yet, but at the end of this time lapse you'll see by that time I'm on a version of the game which has the contour lines added. So stuff like that is pretty cool to see as well, I think. Anyway, overall responses to the first video seemed to be that people were glad that I was trying my hand at a European city and making some rural areas, which I kind of figured would happen. Understandably, I think a lot of creators are American, and also, to be honest, it's just a little bit easier to make gridded cities in a game like this, so I kind of figured everybody would more or less gravitate toward that direction, or just show off the game and all the different elements that were added to it, which, to be honest, I haven't done. There were also some people asking why I didn't show off more what the game is like and what functionalities the game has. And I'm just gonna be honest, I think you're better off watching somebody else's video for that. I'm just gonna continue what I've been doing in the first video and just build some rural areas, place loads of trees, because yes, this also means that a lot of the stuff that I'm doing here is just placing trees. It is what it is, but you know, the goal of this, I think, makes it worth it. That is making as large of a somewhat realistic rural area as I can to really give the city some context that I think it needs to live in. And it's a lot of fun to do this stuff, actually. For my next city build, I might even take it further and first build a whole rural area and don't build any city anything whatsoever, and then try to see how a city would realistically grow into that area, because during this build I tried to keep in mind what a city filled in on old rural plots would look like, as they would realistically historically grow, but yeah, it's a little bit too much effort to first build all of the fields, so I'm just trying my hand at doing this a little bit like a doodle, if you will, which kind of makes it fun as well. As much as these time lapses look like not that much is happening, or it's kind of all the same, personally I found it really fun to just turn on some music and work on all of these tree lines and shape out some squiggly wiggly farm fields. It's just very, I don't know, it's kind of like a meditation almost. It's pretty chill, so it's all fun to do as well. Anyway, there were some small mistakes, I think, that need, some kind of acknowledgement. The first one, and this is the biggest one, is right-hand driving. A bunch of people correctly noticed that I had right-hand driving turned on this map still. You can turn on left-hand driving, and I really should have, but I forgot. And I went back later to see if I could change it, but unfortunately, and understandably, it's not possible to change that afterwards. So this map should have been left-hand driving all along. I don't know what to do about it. Might actually mirror my videos in the end. That might work, but then all the text is gonna be messed up. It is what it is. I still think it doesn't change too much about, you know, the general experimentation of how to make this area look and whether the buildings and the roads and the trees and everything can fit for a realistic English build. But it is a bit of a shame. It's like the smallest, most stupid mistake you can make to ruin all of the work that you put into it otherwise. So I'm just gonna stop mentioning it, and hopefully you guys will forget about it, or pretend that this is some sort of alternate universe in which the English decided to drive on the right side of the road. Who knows? It is what it is. And then there's the case of the bulldozer brush, which wasn't really a mistake on my part, but it definitely makes doing all of this work a little bit harder than I think it should have. There is no bulldozer brush, as far as I know, which makes the leading trees, and especially the large forests that we have on this map, a little bit tiresome. So that's something that you notice in some of the time lapses, and it also makes the whole tree placing thing take a bit longer than I would like it to. So that's something that personally I would like to see changed, or otherwise I'm pretty sure there's gonna be a mod for that eventually, but you know, it is what it is. And speaking of which, my opinion is that this current build of the game, well, personally anyway, doesn't really matter all that much, because this is just the vanilla game, and everybody knows that this game will be heavily modded, just like City Skylines 1. So this isn't really the final product in that sense, especially if you're like me and you want to go for detail and try to make realistic cities. This is really just to see what the foundation is like, and if I compare this foundation to the foundation of City Skylines 1, it's a day and night difference. This is just so much better that honestly I can't wait for the full release and to see what kind of mods and assets people end up making and how that's going to change the game. Because if it's already this much better from the start, you know, even if it's not perfect, I think there's a lot of potential there, and that's what I'm looking forward to mostly. I think this is just a little testing ground to see what the foundation is like, but once the training wheels are off on this game, we're gonna do some amazing stuff, I think. Also, a small mistake that I think is worth pointing out from the last video, and I don't think it's really a mistake, but it is a fair point. Some people said that St. Luke isn't really the most English town name ever, which is very fair. I've too watched Map Men, and there's a very interesting episode about British town names, which I highly recommend watching, and it's all about why their towns are, well, A, unpronounceable, B, they have different pronunciations for the same letters all the time, and C, they're just kind of weird. I don't think that was the way that they told it in the video, but that's my general observation. So really, my actual project name for this build was something along the lines of Squiggle Diggles. It's unpronounceable. It's like I practiced so many years to pronounce Worcestershire sauce, but even that wasn't perfect. But yeah, it was something along the lines of Squiggle Diggles to sure. But it sounds a little bit more English, but it wasn't gonna cut it for the video. So I just very quickly came up with St. Luke. I think I saw a church somewhere scanning around Google Maps, or like a little hamlet with a similar name. And I was like, you know, that'll do. But it's not the most typical English sounding name. So for some of the hamlets that I'm building in this video, and any of the future villages and stuff in this build, I'll just be using a name generator, because it makes stuff way easier, and it's very fun to just click on a name generator for British names and just look at the stereotypes roll out of it. It's amazing. So many of the names are just so typically British and kind of ridiculous sometimes, and you can just infinitely combine them as well. So it's actually a lot of fun. I kind of wish I actually built more villages in this build, just so I could hit the name generator more often and try to come up with weird combinations of the stuff that the generator comes up with, and just have a good old time. But alas, there are some other things to do, like finishing off this map. For this video, my ambition was to finish this whole island. So this map, we have a large island, which is the starting island, and it's made out of many tiles. I don't know exactly how many, kind of depends on which tiles you buy, because you don't necessarily need to complete the whole island, of course, which I'm not going to do either. Or at least, I'm gonna use the whole island, but some tiny little bits and bobs might be in a different tile, and I think it's a waste to buy those tiles when I want to save my tiles to make a huge metropolis on the other side of the water. So yeah, my ambition was to finish this island, and it's gonna be mostly rural areas once again, but we've done a lot of those already, so the ones that I'm building here are some of the last rural parts that we'll get to, and we'll also be making some other towns besides the St. Luke in the middle. Towns won't be quite as large as St. Luke is, but they'll be up there, I think. And then we'll have a nice combination of rural, urban, village-like atmosphere. There were some arguments that St. Luke isn't quite a village, it's probably more of a town already, and that's very fair, but the milestone was called Grand Village, and I figured it would just fit best for the title. And a last little feedback thing about the last video is I had some comments saying that I was basically doing a UK build, and to stop calling the UK England. And while that is very fair, I'm from the Netherlands, and understandably our country gets called Holland instead of the Netherlands very frequently, so I kind of know how it feels. I am definitely going for an England-inspired build. There was one comment, I don't know who it was, but if you're listening, shout out, leave a comment and I'll can pin you down below for being a legend, who responded that this looked like it was inspired by the area of Plymouth, and that's exactly right. That's more or less where I was looking on Google Maps, just kind of scrolling around, looking at different fields and villages and seeing what it all looked like and trying to emulate it a little bit. None of the roads are exactly emulated from it, but the idea behind the tree lines, the squiggly roads, and the way how to fill in the fields between them is very much based on that area. So I would consider this an attempt at a Southern English build, if not for the fact that, of course, the architecture is slightly off and we don't have the hedges and everything. You know, it's not 100% perfect. It's not like I would say it looks completely like South England would. But honestly, for a vanilla game, I'm already very happy. I think in City Skylines 1 it would be impossible to do anything remotely English in a beta or in a vanilla game, so I'll take it, honestly. I think it's pretty good. Now here I started work on the second town on the island, which is definitely a little bit larger than a village, I guess. And starting off, I figured I would need to add a little ring road that looks like it was added long after this village started existing, with some roundabouts in it, because ring roads with roundabout are a very common sight among some smaller towns in England, just roundabouts in general. It's very fun also looking at the highways and seeing how many highway entrances and exits are full of roundabouts, dog-bone interchanges and stuff like that, or a giant roundabout with entrances and exits on all sides to two highways. Seeing stuff like that is very common, at least from my Google Maps research and my own experience of visiting the UK, so always good to have lots of roundabouts. Plus, I am personally a big fan of roundabouts, so you know what it is. And in the middle of that we have like the older street network. I was thinking of this town as having grown alongside the beach here, so it's kind of following the beach in its street pattern, but then also having some squiggly roads, and the roads are a little bit packed together in the center, and those two roads alongside the water are probably the real city center with the high street, with all of the shops and stuff, and some dense row houses, and the rest of the town is going to be a little bit less dense. And then just outside the ring road we have some newer commercial developments, you know, from the past few decades that didn't quite fit into the town anymore, and that's a little bit removed from it. And also some other developments that maybe sprung up in some older farm fields, like the one over here, the little panhandle that kind of goes off of the ring road. That's not gonna be a ring road so much anymore. So that's my idea behind this town. I think the layout actually feels pretty realistic, pretty nice. I'm happier with it than the first town, than St. Luke for sure. But that's usually what happens, you know, you start practicing a little bit more and then things go a bit more well, I suppose. But still, I'm happy with the both of them, but I think this one overall manages to capture the feel and look to me of a town like this just a little bit more. It also reminds me somewhat of Dutch towns. I think the difference is that while many Dutch towns do have very similar ring roads and roundabouts and commercial developments and stuff like that, it's a bit more planned, it's a bit more straight, and way more row houses that are arranged in a very typical Dutch setting. Not to mention that for Dutch towns you can very, very clearly often tell which decade they were, certain neighborhoods they were designed in. And the differences are a little bit less significant, I think, for English towns. But then again, I'm biased on this, so might not be able to tell exactly. This isn't exactly my forte to begin with in terms of a theme. It's just what I think is the best doable European theme with this map and with the stuff that we have in the game so far. Anyway, going on to the other side of the island, there's some other work to be done. As you can see on my demand bar, I need to build industrial and commercial, which I think is a little bit annoying because I really wasn't planning to have that much industry on the island. And I mostly wanted to build little towns, but it is what it is. We need to build to the demand, so it's time to add a big port over here. So that's what we're building, and I'm trying to make it look like it's actually some kind of cargo harbor, which it really isn't, but at least with the what is it actually? Well, the passenger service that we have built, it kind of looks like it could maybe be some kind of cargo harbor, or at the very least, at first glance from above, it looks like that's the sort of thing that's going on here. So from a realism perspective and from an aerial cinematic viewpoint perspective, I think I'm pretty happy with it. Something I did notice while I was building all of this is that the chicken farm in the bottom left here looks a little bit wonky with all of those different stables for the chickens. You don't call them stables for chickens. I have no idea what to call them for chickens. Doesn't matter. That's kind of what it is, but that's what you get when you have an animal field, I suppose. It's a bit different for the vegetable farming. Anyway, here we have the final larger town of the island, which I figured it would make sense to have the towns on the edges of the island, and especially this town here. It's kind of on the entrance of the sea route, so I think realistically, historically, this would be where a town would be located. It's also on a hill, so it's got a great view. So unfortunately, I don't have access to a lighthouse, but I think realistically this is exactly the kind of spot where you would want a lighthouse to be as well. But yeah, because we don't have it, we just got a little town here with a little bit of commercial development and some row houses, but it's definitely the smallest of the towns so far. Also, I am naming the port area after this town because even though it's a little bit removed from it, I think it's still closer to it than the center of St. Luke. And I think the port started existing a while ago, long before it grew into the giant industrial area that it is nowadays. So it's probably a little bit more connected to this town than it is to St. Luke. But that's just a little bit of lore that I came up with along the way. Something which I also do a lot is placing trees as close to the houses as possible, or around the backyards and stuff like that, because realistically people will place trees in their backyards and stuff, but what I noticed is that the houses do spawn with some bushes and trees, but they don't actually grow the way that standalone trees do. So to give the town the look of a town with real trees in it, and to make them actually more lush, I decided to plant trees everywhere. So the same goes for the town here. And then there we go, using some district tool shenanigans to actually give everything names, and coming up with strange names on the generator was a fun exercise to do as well. So yeah, now we really see the map developing a little bit. I was quickly figuring out if I could do maybe any energy generation or whatever, but it's not really a good spot for wind turbines anywhere on the island, so I'm just gonna continue importing my electricity, which I am super glad in this game that we can import electricity and all kinds of services and export them as well, because it means that starting out in your game, isn't as dependent on certain sources of energy or other services like it was in City Skylines 1, which I think makes a lot of sense. Most cities aren't completely self-sufficient. You'll always rely on neighboring cities and the country that the city is in at large for the electricity network and other larger infrastructure like that. So to have to build it all on your own as a city itself just doesn't really make much sense. It's not as realistic, but also from a gameplay perspective, it means that the start of your game is always trying to do all kinds of infrastructure stuff that you really don't want to be concerned with. So I think starting off a city in this game is a little bit easier and more fun than in City Skylines 1, even from a gameplay perspective, but it's a bit more realistic as well. And overall it means that even though there were some realism elements added to the game, like the way that electricity works and water and sewage pipes work now, they also managed to make it a bit more fun from a gameplay perspective. I think the same goes for the sewage system. We don't have to lay pipes underground anymore. It's all just part of the road network. The same goes for electricity, and it's just more realistic for one, because that is the way it is in real life. It's all just underneath roads, and basically every road has the basic services somewhere underneath it. But also it's just much more fun from a gameplay perspective, because it makes life easier when it comes to stuff like that. And it means you have more time to focus on the fun stuff, like laying out your road network and placing trees and houses and seeing the city grow around it. So yeah, good stuff all around, I think. And pretty happy with the changes they made when it comes to that. Now, one last thing that I think is a worthy critique of this build is terraforming. I got some comments about the terraforming, that it's a little bit of a flat map, which is very fair, and it means it's not super realistic in terms of the British countryside that it's pretending to be. A lot of the English rural countryside that I'm speaking of is very squiggly because of the rolling hills that it's built in, and a lot of the way that towns and villages are placed and have grown over time is also dependent on that same geography, and we can't really play with that as much in this map because it's a bit more flat, even though it does have some nice rolling hills. I think the way that all of these paths are squiggly and everything is a little bit exaggerated because the map is kind of flat, which is very fair, but also it is what it is. I don't really have enough space to realistically start terraforming everything to make it a bit more hilly. It would also take a lot of time, and yeah, not having the entire map unlocked means that you're gonna have some weird edges around that as well. So in the end, I opted not to do this and just work with what we have here. And to be very honest, my future plans are to make a Dutch series if it turns out that we have enough mods and assets to do stuff like that. I would love to do a Dutch series in the full release if possible. So yeah, honestly, I'm not even too concerned with learning how the terraforming works. I'm just not gonna build too many cities on the hills, I think, eventually. I already feel like I'm kind of doing something out of my depth here by trying my hand at an English build, but it is also fun to learn some new stuff and try and mess around with it. So yeah, fair enough. And with that, we've arrived at the last part of this video and the last few squiggly lines and other finishing touches that I wanted to do to really finish this island. And I have some small tips, I guess, to share as well, or insights in how I'm doing all of this stuff. So for the squiggly roads and the tree lines and bush lines and stuff like that, usually for these I decide to just turn off snapping, and that's an easy way to make these things as squiggly as possible, and then just whack around with the cursor and see wherever the curves take you, just kind of randomly. It really is like doodling. Sometimes you have the terrain to follow. Realistically, you really want to do that, but for videos like these, my land is just a little bit too flat, so while I do follow some hills here and there, and it definitely helps to make it look more realistic, very often I also just kind of go at it. It also helps to create some main roads first that look like they're connecting different towns. So for instance, in this case, We really have some main roads that almost in a straight line connect some of the main towns and villages. And then around that, you start getting some smaller squiggly roads, and then you start filling in the gaps between that. So it really helps to make some main ones and then try to see how you can fill it in kind of randomly between it. But turning off snapping makes things a lot easier as well. And for the towns, I decided to finish this town by filling in some of the areas that I removed near the end of the last video. I had to remove some of these areas because they looked a little bit wonky after I deleted many of the houses in them to prevent my XP from going up, so that I can have enough space or time for the trees to grow. But ever since, they've been empty, and now it's time to fill them in again. And actually, I'm a little bit happier with how I filled them in as opposed to how they were originally, because now they really started looking like some fields that were incorporated into the town and that they built some roads into to create some suburbs. So I think, all things considered, it actually kind of helped the overall build. Over here, I had to build a small expansion to the industrial area because I still had a lot of demand for industry and commercial zones. It is what it is. There's no way to get around it. I just had to build a little bit, so I decided to expand into the forest and make it seem like it was some sort of very new expansion. And also this gives me a nice space to build the road maintenance building, because I still hadn't built it. And though my roads do kind of look fine, they are absolutely terrible and disgusting, and one look at the info panel about road quality told me that it's worse than Belgium. So that's what it is. And also I decided to fill in some of these areas with industry and commercial as well. So now this industrial area has finally grown to attach itself to St. Luke itself. But I think that's also a realistic process of a city growing over time. So I'm actually pretty happy with it, even though it wasn't my original plan. Sometimes trying to build an organic city is kind of approaching it like Bob Ross. There are no mistakes, just happy little accidents. Anything that happens that's unplanned actually makes your city look more unplanned and organic, so that's kind of what you're looking for. Anyway, that's it for the time lapse, so I'm gonna leave you guys with some more cinematic shots. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and looking forward to see you on the next one. Bye bye!